A white officer tries to kick a black woman out of first class, but her husband's identity shocks him. What would you do if someone questioned your worth simply because of how you look? Not your accomplishments, not your integrity, just the color of your skin. This isn't just a hypothetical question. It's exactly what happened to Natalie James on what should have been an ordinary flight. But what started as humiliation quickly turned into a moment no one on that plane would ever forget. Why? Because the man trying to strip her of her dignity had no idea who her husband was or the storm he was about to unleash. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The airport buzzed with its usual symphony of chaos. Suitcases rattled across the polished floors, flight announcements echoed through the terminals, and passengers hustled to catch their planes. Amid the cacophony, Natalie James walked calmly toward Gate 12. She carried herself with an elegance that turned heads, though not everyone's gaze was friendly. Dressed in a sleek white blouse, paired with tailored slacks, she radiated confidence. Her coiled hair framed her face, and a silver bracelet glinted on her wrist as she wheeled a small suitcase behind her. The first-class boarding line was nearly empty, with only a few passengers waiting to step onto the plane. Natalie handed her ticket to the gate agent, who briefly studied her boarding pass before flashing a polite smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. James." "Thank you," Natalie replied warmly, her voice steady and self-assured. She adjusted the strap of her leather handbag and stepped onto the jet bridge. The first-class cabin was a world apart from the chaos of the terminal. Plush leather seats, ample legroom, and the soft hum of luxury surrounded her. Natalie's eyes scanned the space as she located her seat, 3A, a window seat near the front. As she approached, she noticed the man already seated in 3B, the aisle seat beside hers. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, and clad in a rumpled button-down shirt. His thinning hair barely covered his scalp, and his face bore a permanent scowl. Natalie caught the faint glint of a badge on his belt. A cop, she thought, noting his demeanor and the way he sprawled in his seat as if he owned the space. She gave him a polite nod as she slid into her seat. The man didn't respond. Instead, he gave her a quick, dismissive glance before turning his attention to his phone. Natalie settled in, taking out a book from her bag, determined to enjoy the flight despite the tension she already sensed. Minutes later, the flight attendant began her pre-departure rounds, offering passengers complimentary beverages. As she reached Natalie's row, the cop leaned toward her, his voice just loud enough for Natalie to hear. "Excuse me, but are you sure this seat belongs to her?" he asked, gesturing toward Natalie with his chin. The flight attendant blinked, momentarily startled. "Yes, sir. She's seated in 3A. The man chuckled dryly, a low, condescending sound. "I just wanted to make sure. You never know these days." Natalie froze, gripping her book tighter. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting the flight attendant's. The young woman offered an apologetic smile before moving on, but the cop's words lingered in the air like a foul odor. Natalie took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't owe anyone an explanation for her presence in first class. But the tension in her shoulders refused to ease. The plane continued boarding, the cabin filling with a handful of other passengers. Natalie kept her focus on her book, though the words blurred as her mind replayed the man's remark. She sensed his eyes flicking toward her periodically, as if he were searching for another reason to challenge her presence. Finally, he couldn't help himself. "First class, huh?" he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must have hit the lottery or something." Natalie turned to him, her expression calm but firm. "No, I didn't, but thanks for your concern." Her response caught him off guard. His lips twitched, but he quickly masked his surprise with a smirk. "Sure, just seems surprising, that's all." Natalie tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "What's surprising?" The man leaned back in his seat, feigning nonchalance. "Oh, nothing. Forget I said anything." But Natalie didn't forget. She knew exactly what he meant. The same subtle digs, the same veiled hostility. She'd encountered it countless times. Each instance was a reminder of the stereotypes people like him clung to, unable to reconcile the sight of a successful black woman with their narrow expectations. As the plane's engines roared to life, signaling their imminent departure, the cop finally dropped his pretense. He flagged down the flight attendant again, his voice louder this time. "Ma'am, I don't think she belongs here," he said, gesturing openly at Natalie. "You need to check her ticket again. I'm pretty sure she's in the wrong section." Natalie's stomach tightened, but she refused to let him see her rattled. She carefully placed her book in her lap and turned to face the flight attendant, whose cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I already showed my ticket," Natalie said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Would you like to see it again?" The attendant hesitated, caught between the man's aggressive tone and Natalie's quiet authority. Finally, she nodded. "If you don't mind, ma'am." Just to clarify, Natalie reached into her bag, pulling out her boarding pass. She handed it over with deliberate precision, her gaze never leaving the cop's face. The attendant studied it for a moment before handing it back with a nervous smile. "Thank you, Mrs. James. Everything's in order." But the cop wasn't done. He leaned back in his seat, muttering loudly enough for the other passengers to hear. "Figures. Probably bought it with someone else's money." Natalie's hands clenched into fists in her lap. She didn't respond, but inside, the fire of indignation burned hotter. She would not let this man ruin her flight, but she also wouldn't let his actions go unanswered. Unbeknownst to him, the person who would deliver that answer was already on his way. The plane's cabin hummed with quiet anticipation as the last of the passengers settled into their seats. The flight crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for takeoff. Natalie sat upright, her face an unreadable mask of calm, though her heart raced beneath the surface. Her fingers resting on her book trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the simmering anger she refused to let boil over. Across the aisle, the man, Officer Brad Taylor, smirked triumphantly, convinced he had successfully put Natalie in her place. He leaned back in his seat, his badge glinting faintly under the cabin lights as though it were a shield of invincibility. Natalie glanced out the window, her thoughts churning. She had spent years learning to navigate situations like this, to remain composed while the world demanded her patience. But today, something about the man's audacity gnawed at her. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reminder of the battles she and others fought daily. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're awaiting a final passenger before we can close the cabin doors. Thank you for your patience." Natalie's heart lifted at the announcement. She knew who that final passenger was. Ethan James stepped into the jet bridge, his polished shoes clicking against the metal floor. He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. His tailored navy suit fit him perfectly, and his gold cufflinks caught the light as he adjusted his sleeves. Ethan had a reputation for precision, both in his courtroom victories as a federal prosecutor and in his personal demeanor. He was always deliberate, calm when others panicked, methodical when others rushed. But now, as he walked toward the plane, there was a storm brewing behind his piercing eyes. Natalie's text had reached him just moments before he left the terminal lounge. Her words were brief, but they carried enough weight to quicken his steps. "An off-duty cop is harassing me. He's trying to have me removed from my seat." The thought of someone, anyone, daring to mistreat his wife filled him with a cold, focused anger. He quickened his pace, his mind already working through how to handle the situation without escalating it further. The cabin fell silent as Ethan entered. His eyes immediately scanned the rows, landing on Natalie. He offered her a brief, reassuring smile before his gaze shifted to the man seated beside her. Brad's posture stiffened slightly, though he quickly masked it with the same smug arrogance. Ethan moved toward them, his movements unhurried but deliberate. The flight attendant greeted him with a nervous smile, recognizing his polished demeanor. "Welcome aboard, Mr. James." "Thank you," he replied smoothly, his voice carrying just enough authority to draw the attention of nearby passengers. He stopped at Natalie's row, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone calm, but laced with an undercurrent of tension. Natalie looked up at him, her expression softening for the first time since the confrontation began. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Brad, sensing the shift in energy, cleared his throat loudly. "And who are you supposed to be?" Ethan turned his attention to Brad, studying him with a practiced, lawyerly gaze that seemed to dissect him piece by piece. "I'm her husband," he said evenly. "And you are?" Brad smirked, leaning back in his seat. "Brad Taylor, off-duty officer." He gestured to his badge. "Just trying to make sure everyone here belongs where they're supposed to." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he kept his composure. "And what made you think my wife didn't belong here, Officer Taylor?" Brad shrugged, his smirk widening. "Just doing my job, even off the clock. Sometimes people try to sneak into places they don't belong." Ethan's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Is that so?" The flight attendant, clearly uneasy, stepped forward. "Mr. James, is there an issue we need to resolve here?" Ethan smiled politely at her before speaking loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Yes, there's an issue. This man," he pointed to Brad, "has been harassing my wife, accusing her of not belonging in her assigned seat despite her providing proof. And now, I'd like to know why." The attendant's face flushed. I wasn't aware." Brad interrupted, his voice raised. "Look, I was just making sure everything was in order. No harm in double-checking, right?" "No harm." Ethan's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with intensity. "You humiliated her in front of an entire cabin. You abused your authority as an officer to intimidate her. That's more than harm. It's misconduct." Brad's smirk faltered for the first time. "Listen, pal, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm Ethan James," he said, his voice like a hammer striking steel. "Federal prosecutor. And I've dealt with men like you before. Men who hide behind a badge to justify their prejudice." Gasps rippled through the cabin as murmurs began spreading among the passengers. Brad's face turned an alarming shade of red. The captain, alerted by the commotion, arrived moments later. He listened as Ethan recounted the events, his words measured but cutting. By the end of the explanation, the captain's expression was grim. "Officer Taylor," the captain said sternly, "we have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior on our flights. I'm going to have to ask you to disembark." "What?" Brad's voice cracked. "You can't do that. I'm a cop, and I'm the captain of this aircraft," the man replied firmly. "This plane doesn't leave until you're off it." Natalie, watching silently, felt a surge of vindication as Brad's bravado crumbled. Ethan remained by her side, his hand still on her shoulder, a steadying presence as justice began to unfold. The silence in the first-class cabin lingered long after Officer Brad Taylor was escorted off the plane. Passengers exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of discomfort, curiosity, and guilt. Some had sided with Brad earlier, their assumptions aligning with his accusations, while others had stayed silent, unwilling to intervene. Now, the reality of his humiliation left the air heavy with tension. Natalie remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the closed cover of her book. She exhaled deeply, releasing the tension she had held on to for the past hour. Ethan, standing tall beside her, scanned the cabin with a sharp gaze that dared anyone to challenge them again. The flight attendant from earlier returned, her cheeks flushed as she approached Natalie and Ethan. She hesitated for a moment, her hands clutching a small notebook, before leaning in. "Mrs. James, Mr. James, I want to sincerely apologize for what happened earlier," she began, her voice soft but steady. "That behavior was completely unacceptable. I should have handled it better." Natalie looked up, her expression calm but firm. "You did what you thought was best in the moment. I just hope this is a learning experience for everyone." The attendant nodded quickly, relief flashing across her face. "Thank you for your understanding. If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." Ethan's gaze softened slightly. Ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else would be a good start. The attendant straightened, as if taking his words as a personal mission. "Absolutely. I'll make sure this incident is reported." Ethan finally took his seat beside Natalie, his movements slow and deliberate. The hum of the plane's engines filled the quiet space between them as the flight crew prepared for takeoff. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, their thoughts swirling in the aftermath of what had just unfolded. "You handled that well," Natalie said softly, breaking the silence. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and weariness. Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I don't tolerate anyone disrespecting you, Nat, especially not someone like him." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. "I didn't want to text you, but I knew I couldn't let him get away with it." "You did the right thing," Ethan assured her. "Men like him thrive on silence. The moment you push back, they crumble." Natalie nodded, her grip tightening around his hand. "Still, it's exhausting, always having to prove I belong." Ethan's expression darkened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "I know, and it shouldn't be this way, but you're stronger than he could ever understand." As the plane taxied down the runway, Natalie stared out the window, the lights of the airport blurring into streaks of gold. She thought about how many times she had faced moments like this, subtle insults, questioning stares, blatant challenges to her worth. Each one left a mark, a reminder of the world's refusal to accept her without scrutiny. Ethan seemed to sense her thoughts. "You know," he said, his voice low but steady, "there's a reason men like him act the way they do. They see someone like you, poised, successful, unshaken, and it terrifies them because it reminds them of everything they'll never be." Natalie turned to him, her lips curving into a small, bittersweet smile. "You always know what to say." "It's the truth," he replied simply, "and you need to hear it." As the plane climbed into the sky, the cabin grew quieter, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop. Suddenly, a woman from a few rows back leaned forward, her voice soft but audible. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Natalie. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up earlier. What that man did was wrong, and I should have said something." Natalie looked at the woman, a middle-aged passenger with kind eyes and an apologetic expression. She offered a small nod. "Thank you. It's never easy to speak up in situations like that, but it's important." The woman nodded, her gaze earnest. "It is, and I'll remember that next time." As the flight settled into its rhythm, Natalie and Ethan sat quietly, their hands still intertwined. Natalie leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her eyes heavy but her mind restless. She thought about the passengers around her, how they had watched, judged, and ultimately stayed silent until it was too late. But she also thought about Ethan's words, his unwavering support, and the way he had turned the tables with a calm authority that left no room for argument. "I was thinking," she murmured, her voice almost lost in the hum of the cabin, "maybe I should do more." Ethan tilted his head toward her, curious. "More? To speak out, to share these stories. It's not just about me. There are so many people who go through this and don't have someone like you to stand up for them." Ethan's hand tightened around hers. "If anyone can make a difference, it's you. And I'll be with you every step of the way." Natalie smiled, a quiet determination settling over her. She had faced humiliation, but she wouldn't let it define her. Instead, she would use it, turn it into fuel for something greater. As the plane soared above the clouds, Natalie closed her eyes, letting the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing calm her. Brad Taylor was gone, but the fight he represented wasn't over. And she knew the battle wasn't just hers. It was for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. Her resolve hardened. This was just one moment in a larger story, and she was determined to ensure the next chapter would be one of justice and change. The cabin lights dimmed, but within Natalie, a fire burned brighter than ever. The flight had settled into its rhythm, with passengers adjusting their seats, flipping through magazines, or scrolling on their phones. But despite the calm facade, the energy in the first-class cabin felt charged, as though everyone was waiting for something to unfold. Natalie leaned back in her seat, her fingers lightly brushing against Ethan's hand. The tension that had gripped her earlier had dissipated, replaced by quiet contemplation. Ethan, ever perceptive, glanced at her. "What's on your mind?" Natalie hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where the sky stretched endlessly. "I keep thinking about him. About Brad." Ethan's jaw tightened at the name, his protective instincts flaring. "He's irrelevant now, Nat. He's been dealt with." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "For now, yes. But how many others like him are out there? How many people have been humiliated, silenced, or worse, because someone like him felt untouchable?" Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "Too many," he admitted. "But that's why we fight. Why we push back. Men like Brad only have power because too many people let them." Natalie nodded, his words resonating deeply. But even as she processed his reassurance, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that this wasn't over. Not yet. 2 rows back, a hushed conversation began to ripple through the cabin. A man in a crisp business suit leaned toward his companion, whispering animatedly. "I can't believe it," the man said, his voice low but audible enough for nearby passengers to catch snippets. "That cop, Brad Taylor, wasn't it? I've seen his name before. He's been in trouble with internal affairs." His companion, a woman with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor, frowned. "Why wasn't he dismissed then?" "Probably protected by his precinct," the man replied. "But if this gets out, if someone reports him again, he's finished." Natalie caught fragments of the conversation and turned slightly, her curiosity piqued. She exchanged a glance with Ethan, who had also picked up on the murmurs. Ethan leaned closer to her, his voice barely above a whisper. Sounds like our friend Brad has a history. That doesn't surprise me, Natalie said, her tone sharp. Men like him don't just wake up one day and decide to abuse their power. It's a pattern. Ethan's eyes darkened. Then maybe it's time to break that pattern. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, thanking passengers for their patience and cooperation during boarding. The mention of cooperation drew a few quiet chuckles and raised eyebrows from those who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Natalie noted the glances and the way some passengers quickly looked away when she met their eyes. Ethan, ever the observer, leaned toward her. They're embarrassed, he said quietly. Good, Natalie replied, her voice firm. Maybe next time they'll think twice about staying silent. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied toward the gate, Natalie felt a sense of closure begin to form. But it was short-lived. The cabin door opened, and passengers began to gather their belongings, preparing to disembark. Natalie and Ethan remained seated, letting the rush pass. They had no reason to hurry. They preferred to let the crowd thin out before leaving. Suddenly, a murmur swept through the aisle. At the front of the plane, two uniformed officers entered, their faces set in grim determination. They conferred briefly with the flight crew before scanning the cabin. Natalie's breath caught, her eyes narrowing as she realized who they were looking for. Ethan leaned closer. Looks like someone called ahead, he murmured, a note of satisfaction in his voice. The officers stopped near Natalie's row, addressing the passengers nearby. Excuse me, did anyone witness an incident involving Officer Brad Taylor earlier on this flight? A few hesitant hands went up, and the officers began taking statements. Ethan watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Karma moves fast today, he said. Natalie allowed herself a small smile. It's about time. As the officers collected their final statements, one of them turned to Natalie and Ethan. Thank you for your patience. We'll be following up on this incident with the proper authorities. Ethan stood, extending a hand. I'll be contacting the Department of Justice to ensure this matter is handled thoroughly. The officer nodded, clearly recognizing Ethan's authority. Understood, sir. And thank you for standing up for what's right. Natalie rose, her posture straight and unyielding. She looked around the cabin, catching the eyes of a few passengers who had avoided her gaze earlier. This time, they didn't look away. As they exited the plane, Natalie felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. But it wasn't just relief, it was a sense of purpose. She and Ethan had stood up, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or silenced. In the terminal, Ethan took Natalie's hand as they walked toward the baggage claim. The incident was behind them now, but its impact lingered. Natalie knew it wasn't the end of the fight. It was merely a chapter in a much larger story. You okay? Ethan asked, his voice gentle. I am, Natalie replied. More than okay. I'm ready. Ethan smiled, his pride evident. Ready for what? For whatever comes next, she said, her voice steady and full of resolve. Because this isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did today. Ethan nodded, squeezing her hand. And you'll make it happen. I know you will. As they stepped outside, the warm sun bathed them in light, a fitting end to a turbulent day. For Natalie, it wasn't just the end of a flight. It was the beginning of something much greater. And she was ready to face it, one battle at a time. The drive home from the airport was quiet, save for the soft hum of the car's engine. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the passing cityscape. The lights from buildings and street lamps streaked across the window, their glow casting fleeting shadows over her thoughtful expression. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on Natalie's leg, a silent gesture of support. The confrontation on the plane lingered in both their minds, each detail replaying in vivid clarity. The tension, the injustice, the raw nerve of it all. It hadn't truly dissipated. Instead, it settled into something heavier, more resolute. Do you think he'll face consequences this time? Natalie finally asked, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, his brow furrowed. He will. I'll make sure of it. There was no hesitation in his tone, but Natalie knew the world they lived in. Too often, consequences for men like Brad Taylor were fleeting, if they came at all. The systems that protected them were intricate, built to shield rather than hold accountable. But how far will it go? She pressed. A suspension? A slap on the wrist? I can't help but think about how many people like him are still out there doing worse. Ethan sighed, his grip on the wheel tightening. It's not enough. I know. But every small victory matters, Nat. Today wasn't just about Brad. It was about everyone watching, everyone who saw that behavior and realized it's not acceptable. Natalie nodded, though her heart ached with the weight of the battle ahead. I just wanted to stop. For good. By the time they reached home, the city had grown quiet. Their house, tucked into a serene neighborhood, offered a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. Natalie stepped out of the car and breathed deeply, letting the crisp night air fill her lungs. The soft rustle of leaves and the faint chirping of crickets felt grounding, a reminder that peace was still possible. Inside, Ethan headed to the kitchen to pour them both a glass of wine. Natalie sank into the couch, her body finally relaxing as she kicked off her shoes. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Ethan returned, handing her a glass before settling beside her. "You were incredible today," he said, his voice low. "I know how hard it was to stay composed." Natalie took a sip of her wine, the rich flavor warming her throat. "I didn't feel incredible. I felt tired. Tired of always having to prove myself, defend myself. It's exhausting." Ethan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You shouldn't have to. But until the world changes, you'll always have me to fight beside you." Her lips curved into a soft smile, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I know, and that makes all the difference." The next morning, Natalie woke early, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. Ethan was still asleep, his breathing deep and steady beside her. She slipped out of bed quietly, grabbing her robe before heading to the kitchen. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, she sat at the dining table and opened her laptop. The events of the previous day had solidified something within her, a need to do more, to take action beyond the moment. She couldn't let Brad Taylor's behavior become just another forgotten incident. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered how to begin. Then, slowly, she started typing. Subject line, Incident Report, Officer Brad Taylor. To Department of Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Division. Body, my name is Natalie James, and I am writing to formally report the misconduct of Officer Brad Taylor during a flight on date. As an off-duty officer, Taylor used his badge and position to harass and intimidate me, accusing me of not belonging in first class despite having a valid boarding pass. His actions were not only inappropriate, but emblematic of systemic abuse of power that cannot go unaddressed. The email was precise and factual, but it carried the weight of Natalie's frustration and determination. She attached the witness statements provided by the officers at the airport, along with her own account of the incident. Before hitting send, she paused, taking a deep breath. This was just the beginning. By the time Ethan woke and joined her, Natalie had already sent the email. She was sipping her second cup of coffee, her face set in quiet determination. "You're up early," he remarked, kissing the top of her head as he passed. "I had something I needed to do," she replied simply. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Care to share?" Natalie turned her laptop to face him, showing the email she'd sent. Ethan read it carefully, a proud smile spreading across his face. "You're amazing, you know that?" She shrugged, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "It's just a report. It might not even lead to anything." "It will," Ethan said firmly, "because you won't let it stop here. And neither will I." Over the next few days, the incident began to gain quiet traction. Word spread among legal circles and advocacy groups, and soon Natalie received an email from a prominent civil rights organization. They wanted to amplify her story, to use it as a rallying point for greater accountability within law enforcement. Natalie hesitated at first. She wasn't seeking fame or attention. She just wanted justice. But as she and Ethan talked it over, she realized the power in sharing her story. "This isn't just about Brad," Ethan reminded her. "It's about showing others that they can stand up too, that they don't have to accept this." And so, Natalie agreed. With Ethan's unwavering support, she began working with the organization to draft a public statement, one that would call for systemic change while protecting her dignity and privacy. One evening, as Natalie and Ethan sat on their porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in days. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but she had taken the first step, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her voice. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You're making a difference, Nat. I hope you see that." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "I do. And it's just the beginning." As the first stars appeared in the sky, Natalie closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in a while, she felt ready. Together, she and Ethan would face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that justice, no matter how slow, was worth fighting for. The days following Natalie's email to the Department of Internal Affairs passed slowly, each one laden with a quiet anticipation. She tried to go about her routine as usual, but a part of her mind remained tethered to the incident, wondering how far her report would reach and whether it would make a difference. Ethan, ever the steady presence, encouraged her to remain patient. Change doesn't happen overnight, he often reminded her. But Natalie wasn't seeking change overnight. She was seeking acknowledgement, accountability, and the hope that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. It was a Wednesday morning when Natalie's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She was sitting at the dining table, her laptop open, halfway through an article on civil rights advocacy. The vibration startled her, and she hesitated before answering. "This is Natalie James," she said, her tone cautious but polite. "Mrs. James, this is Special Investigator Karen Moore with Internal Affairs. I'm following up on the report you filed regarding Officer Brad Taylor." Natalie's heart quickened. She set her coffee cup down carefully, trying to steady her voice. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if anyone would follow up. We take these reports very seriously," Investigator Moore replied. Her tone was professional but empathetic. "I've reviewed the witness statements and your account. I'd like to ask a few more questions if you're available." Natalie glanced at her laptop, then at the clock on the wall. "Of course. I'm happy to help." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Investigator Moore was thorough, asking Natalie to recount the incident in detail, from Brad's initial remarks to the intervention of the flight crew and airport security. Natalie answered each question carefully, her voice steady despite the memories stirring within her. "Has Officer Taylor faced similar complaints in the past?" Natalie asked cautiously as the conversation drew to a close. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I can't disclose specific details at this time," Moore said carefully, "but I can tell you that your report has prompted a deeper review of his conduct." Natalie felt a flicker of hope. "I appreciate that. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about making sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." "Understood, Mrs. James," Moore replied. "We'll keep you informed as the investigation progresses. Thank you for your courage in coming forward." When the call ended, Natalie leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. It wasn't closure, but it was a step forward. 2 days later, an email from a journalist landed in Natalie's inbox. The subject line read, "Request for interview regarding Officer Brad Taylor." Natalie stared at the screen, her emotions a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. The journalist, Maria Diaz, introduced herself as an investigative reporter for a major news outlet. She explained that Brad Taylor's name had come up in a broader investigation into misconduct within his precinct and that Natalie's experience might be an important piece of the puzzle. Ethan was the first person she told. They sat on the couch that evening, the glow of the lamp casting soft shadows in the room. "What do you think?" she asked, showing him the email. Ethan read it carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's a double-edged sword," he said finally. "Sharing your story could amplify the impact, but it also opens you up to public scrutiny." Natalie nodded, her thoughts mirroring his. "I don't want to become the face of this, but if it helps hold him accountable." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Natalie's resolve hardened. "I'll do the interview, but on my terms." The meeting with Maria Diaz was held at a quiet cafe downtown. Natalie arrived early, her nerves taut, but her expression composed. Maria, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, greeted her warmly and ordered them both coffee. "Thank you for meeting with me," Maria began, setting her recorder on the table. "I want you to know that my goal here is to shine a light on systemic issues, not sensationalize your experience." Natalie nodded, appreciating the journalist's candor. "I'm here because I believe stories like mine need to be told, but I also need to protect my privacy and my family." "Of course," Maria assured her. "We can anonymize parts of your story if you prefer, but your voice will be the most powerful element." For the next hour, Natalie recounted the events on the plane, her voice steady but charged with emotion. She spoke about the systemic challenges she had faced throughout her life, tying the incident to a broader pattern of injustice. "This isn't just about Brad Taylor," she concluded. "It's about the culture that allows people like him to thrive unchecked." That's what needs to change. Maria listened intently, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. By the end of the interview, Natalie felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and empowerment. She had opened herself up, but in doing so, she had reclaimed the narrative. A week later, Maria's article was published. The headline read, "When Power Harms, a Black Woman's Fight Against Abuse of Authority." The piece wove Natalie's experience with broader issues of systemic racism and police misconduct, backed by statistics and other testimonies from individuals who had faced similar situations. The response was overwhelming. Emails and messages poured in from readers who related to Natalie's story, thanking her for her courage and sharing their own experiences. Advocacy groups reached out, offering their support. And most importantly, Internal Affairs expedited its investigation into Brad Taylor, placing him on immediate suspension. One evening, as Natalie and Ethan prepared dinner together, her phone buzzed with another call from Investigator Moore. "Mrs. James, I wanted to inform you that Officer Taylor has been formally charged with misconduct. The evidence we've gathered, including your testimony, has been critical in moving this forward." Natalie closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Thank you for letting me know." When she ended the call, Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace. "You did it," he murmured. "We did it," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. "And this is just the beginning." As they sat down to eat, the weight of the past weeks began to lift. Natalie knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't alone in it. The ripples of her courage had reached farther than she had ever imagined, and they would continue to spread. Justice wasn't a single moment, it was a journey, and Natalie was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The weeks that followed brought a sense of clarity to Natalie's life. The echoes of her stand against Brad Taylor reverberated far beyond what she had imagined. Messages of support continued to pour in, some from strangers, others from friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Each one reminded her that her story wasn't just her own. It was part of a larger tapestry of resilience and justice. The investigation into Brad Taylor culminated in his dismissal from the police force, a decision announced publicly by the precinct. While the official statement cited repeated violations of conduct, Natalie knew it was her voice, and the voices of others, that had forced the system to act. But for Natalie, it wasn't about vengeance or seeing one man fall. It was about the precedent it set, the hope it inspired in those who had long felt powerless. She had turned her pain into action, and in doing so, she had opened the door for others to do the same. One evening, Natalie and Ethan sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was warm, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of a peaceful night. "I've been thinking," Natalie said, breaking the comfortable silence. Ethan turned to her, a smile playing at his lips. "That's always a good thing." She chuckled softly, but her expression grew serious. "I want to do more. Not just reacting to what happens, but being proactive, educating, advocating, creating spaces where people feel empowered to speak up." Ethan nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "You've always had that in you. What's the first step?" Natalie looked out at the horizon, her gaze steady. "I want to start a foundation, something that supports people who face discrimination, helps them navigate the system, and amplifies their stories. If I've learned anything, it's that our voices are our most powerful tools." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. "You'll change lives, Nat. I have no doubt." The foundation, aptly named Voices of Justice, launched a few months later. Its mission was clear: to provide resources, legal aid, and a platform for those fighting against discrimination and abuse of power. Natalie poured her heart into it, using her own experience as a guiding light. The ripple effect continued to grow. Stories began emerging from communities across the country, each one a testament to the strength and courage of individuals who refused to stay silent. Natalie's foundation became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, change was possible. One evening, as Natalie reviewed emails from people her foundation had helped, Ethan entered the room with 2 glasses of wine. He sat one beside her and leaned against the desk, watching her with a quiet smile. "You've come a long way," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes soft but resolute. "We've come a long way." He raised his glass. "To justice, to resilience, and to you." Natalie clinked her glass against his, the sound ringing like a quiet victory. She sipped her wine, savoring the moment, the journey that had brought her here. As the night deepened, Natalie felt a profound sense of peace. The battle she had faced was just one of many, but it had shaped her, strengthened her, and set her on a path of purpose. She had turned her pain into power, her silence into strength. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. And so, Natalie's courage sparked a ripple effect that went far beyond one flight. It became a story of justice, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. But this is just one story among many, and the fight for equality continues every day. If you believe in justice, if you believe in change, and if you believe that every voice deserves to be heard, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that inspire, empower, and remind us of what's possible when we stand together. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.